Hey guys, we are back with day 15, and I just decided I really want to talk about the human diet, just different aspects of kind of some of the more of the reasons why I'm doing this diet and kind of how my thought process has changed a little since starting this. Some of the things that I've thought about that I honestly never really thought about before, okay? And a big part of that has to do with the human diet, what we've eaten historically, what makes sense for human beings to eat, and how maybe different climates or regions, where human beings have existed might have had an effect on their diet. And I'm not an expert by any means, but this is just some of the thoughts that I've had and some of the things that I've run across since starting this journey. So I'm going to share those with you guys today. And one of the big thoughts that I keep having is what makes sense for human beings to eat. And when you think about it, it's just not a simple question because there's so many different climates. If you look up in more the far north, like where Alaska is, where the Inuits lived, the indigenous people in those regions, like their diet up there would have consisted largely of the meats and the fats that they got from hunting animals up there. Why? Because it's cold. There's not a lot of plants growing up there, and the ones that are very seasonal, at best. So they would have had to rely mainly on meats and fats, just like we do in the carnivore diet. And then thinking about other parts of the country, looking up, what people ate if they're living more of a tropical region. In those regions, it seems to me like it would make more sense for human beings to eat a little wider variety, okay, maybe a lot more different fruits, especially because those largely grow in tropical climates, and then a wide variety of meats and fats again, and then maybe some vegetables depending on where they were, what was naturally growing. And then in temperate climates where you've got all four seasons, it makes sense for human beings to eat kind of, somewhat based on seasonal. So, in the springtime, you might have a little wider variety of greens and veggies available. And then as you get into summer and into fall, maybe some of the fruits start to ripen and there's fruit available for, again, a season. But through the entire year, people in those temperate climates still would have been consistently relying on meats to provide a majority of their nutrition. That's what makes sense. And especially if you existed as part of a culture where it was primarily hunter-gatherer as opposed to farmer, if you're traveling across this, massive land, or you're moving around from one place to another very regularly, you can't feasibly grow crops, right? Like you're not going to plant a field of wheat and grow that. You're not going to plant a vegetable garden because you can't. So what are you going to be eating? You're going to be eating the meat that you can hunt on your trip. You might herd some animals with you, and so you might even be able to get some of your food from the animals that you tend and herd with you on the journey. And you might be able to get some items like fruits and nuts, depending on what time of year, again. And then your stuff like vegetables and greens would be a very, very minimal part of your diet. And I realize obviously plenty of cultures have settled down and started, more farming style ways of living. But I don't know. I'm just thinking about what makes most sense for how humans have existed for the longest period of time. Okay, and so this too is going to really vary probably based on what your individual beliefs are about human origins and whatnot. And I'm not going to get into all of that, but just suffice it to say, to me, it makes a lot of sense that human beings did a lot of foraging and hunting for their food historically. And I got curious, so I did a little bit of research on salads, and I was like, okay, where did salads first come from? When did people first start eating a salad? Because I was really curious. I'm like, okay, if we're as certain, different groups of people have different thoughts on this. Not everyone's carnivore. Some are like, a vegan diet is better. So I'm like, okay, where's the evidence for that historically from human diets? And I found out that people didn't even start eating salads the way that we think of them today until less than 2,000 years ago. So that just started within the last 2,000 years, which in the greater span of time of human existence is relatively short, okay? So, and even then, when they first created salads, it would have been like some of the Greeks and Romans that first started eating them. They didn't put everything on them that we do. They did a much wider variety. It wasn't like they sat down with their lettuce, especially not their iceberg lettuce, right? And just topped it with a bunch of ranch dressing or whatever. Like, no, they had this huge variety of greens that they were choosing from, you know, like fennel or leeks or chives or purslane, just a whole, and herbs, all different types of herbs, okay? And like, I was looking up lists, they're like lists that long of all the different greens that they could put in salads, okay? But point being, it hasn't really been all that long that we've been eating salads like that. And even when we did, the toppings that we put on them were so much healthier for us than what they are now. You know, they put like cheeses made from raw milk on there, and they put oil from good sources, not like the vegetable oils, not like the seed oils today. Yucky stuff. It's poison for your body. Okay, they were using stuff like maybe a good olive oil, right? Something that's a lot healthier, richer in those good fatty acids that your body needs, and, you know, maybe some vinegar and then salt and pepper or something. You know, it was much more basic, much more plain, and it just didn't have all the same stuff that modern day, especially here in America, that people like to throw on a salad. So, you know, I don't know. To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for human beings to gulp down these massive salads when that's not even how we ate primarily. It doesn't make sense because in the majority of climates, lettuce and spinach and greens, the tender, good greens that you all want to eat, not the bitter stuff where the plants are literally saying, hey, don't eat me, I'm bitter. Like, you know, like when it's good and tender and delicious, it's a very, very short time span, right? Because I've done some gardening here and there, and enough to know that when it gets hot outside, that lettuce bolts. It goes to seed, okay? No longer good. The leaves turn bitter as can be. And spinach, same thing. It gets tougher and less tender and good, and it bolts and it goes to seed. And then that's it, you know? So I don't know where we get the idea that it's good and healthy to eat salads year round, but it doesn't make any sense to me that that is part of a natural human diet. You know, whatever climate you exist in, lettuce has a very short growing season, and so do most delicious salad greens. I do think, however, there's something to be said of using plants as medicine, and I do think that that's probably the primary, you know, function of plants historically for human beings, is more a medicinal basis and not a nutritional basis. Okay, and there's a few carnivores, if you listen out there, you'll hear people talking about stuff like milk thistle for, you know, your liver function. I myself have used like red raspberry leaf tea to help with my cycles, you know, things like that. I can 100% get on board with that. I think it should be a temporary thing until your body heals, until you get things back in balance, and your diet then takes over whatever need was causing you to require that temporary use of a green or an herb or something like that. Okay? And that's just what's making sense to me as I'm doing the research, as I'm studying, as I'm looking into things more. Okay? And like, few quick facts. So the salads, didn't start eating them till less than 2,000 years ago. All right? When you see like paintings, ancient paintings, this is something I thought was kind of cool actually, but like paintings and pictures were found, you know, in Greek culture, or not Greek, Egyptian culture, sorry. In Egyptian culture, and it had pictures of lettuce growing in them. And, you know, they weren't actually eating the lettuce like salads. They were taking the like white milky substance, like when you crack a lettuce leaf open and it's got that like white milky substance, you know, in the more stalky part. They were consuming that because they thought it helped with fertility and like sexual prowess and whatnot. They thought that that was helpful for that. So that's what they were using the lettuce for. They were taking the seeds after the lettuce bolted, and they were turning the seeds into an oil that's what they were using it for. They were not just sitting there eating big bowls of salad greens. So again, kind of just stuff to think about, stuff I thought was super interesting. Americans, and this is something I did not even think about ever or realize, but Americans did not even start eating salads largely until the 1960s. Guys, that's only like 60 years ago since America, hopped on this salad craze bandwagon and like started pushing salads as a big key to health. And it's like, that's new. Like, that is very new. Okay, and it there's a movie, I'm going to link it for you because it's a great documentary. It's called Fat Fiction, and I found it so eye-opening. I did not go in and fact check everything that they said, but if you listen, you can sift for yourself, decide what makes sense, look up everything that they say if you want to. It made a lot of sense to me, and I did look up a lot of what they said afterwards and found it to be true. And so, yeah, but I will link it below. But it really kind of delves into what happened to the diet for Americans starting around the 60s. There was this big scare about saturated fats, and everyone was like, oh no, saturated fats are terrible for you, and they're going to cause all these health issues, and they're going to cause like heart disease and stuff. And guys, people were so wrong about that. Like, they didn't realize, they were probably doing the best that they could with the information they had at the time. I don't know. I can't like judge the people who were, perpetuating these ideas, but giving them the benefit of the doubt. They were doing the best with what they had, but it was not complete information. It was not factual. It's not how the body actually works. It's not how saturated fatty acids work. And so the diet switched, and a low fat diet became the big craze, and more salads, more lean meats, and lots of good carbohydrates. And included in this is like lower saturated fatty acids. And what were they replacing it with? They were replacing it with vegetable oils and seed oils. Yuck. Nasty stuff, okay? Vegetable oils and seed oils and trans fats and all these items that are, processed in such a way that make them just terrible for the human body. Like, my parents fortunately raised me to like learning this stuff because they took courses in nutrition and diet more from a naturopathic perspective. And so I learned really early on, like, margarine is bad for you, butter is better for you. So, things like that. But a lot of people that grew up in the 60s, it was like, no, avoid butter, it's bad for your heart. Eat this good margarine, it's delicious. And anyway, just crazy stuff like that. And it's like, oh, it was so messed up. We had it so backwards. But we didn't start eating a lot of salads until right around that same time period. Prior to then, I'm sure that plenty of Americans consumed vegetables. What makes sense for an American diet in the majority of the country, which is more of like a four seasons type of climate in the majority of the country? It would have been, meats year round. Lots of meat and potatoes, okay? Lots of fats from all those meats. Good stuff. They didn't waste the animals, and because, these farmers, they're living off of what they can. They're not going to be wasting parts of these animals that they've grown and raised, okay? And then root vegetables, potatoes, maybe carrots, sweet potatoes, maybe stuff like onions. Anything that you can throw in a root cellar and it'll last all winter, I guarantee you that would be the stuff that makes sense for them to grow and eat. Not a bunch of lettuce that's going to wilt and die within like 1 month. Okay? They're not going to waste their time growing things that have such a limited season of edibility. They're going to spend their time planting and growing the crops that they can get the best use out of the whole year. Okay? And once I started realizing these things, it's just like, it makes so much more sense why you would choose to go for either a totally carnivore diet or at the very least more of a keto diet, higher protein, moderate protein, higher fats, and then low or no carbs, okay? You don't need carbohydrates to live. That's something that I don't think is stated clearly enough, often enough. You do not need a carbohydrate to live. You can get by just fine on your proteins and fats. And I didn't even realize that. I thought like, oh, proteins, carbs, and fats, those are the main categories. That's what you need. Those are all your macronutrients. And it's like, yes, they are macronutrients, but you don't need one of those. So, yeah. I just, a whole slew of health issues started around the same time that this push against saturated fat began, and the push towards low-fat diet, more vegetables, more greens, you had a lot higher rates of diabetes and heart disease issues and a slew of other health issues start going up as this diet progressed in America. And you look at the rates of those health issues prior to the 60s, and people are fine. They're not dying of those issues. There was other things, I'm sure, and probably various issues caused by various nutritional deficiencies if you're not eating a balanced diet. But a balanced diet looks very different than heaps of vegetables and a tiny little bit of meat. That's not balanced at all. And I just think it's really important to point that out. This is just stuff that I grew up hearing kind of the reverse, we all saw those pyramid charts, or a lot of us did, if they were still in school when you were growing up. But those pyramid charts with the 6 servings of carbs at the bottom, and then you've got your meats, and then your fruits, your meats and vegetables, and then your fruits and dairy, and then your fats at the top with the smallest little bitty amount. And it's like, that whole chart needs to be reversed completely around, pretty much. And then you'd have it just about right. Except I'd put meat a little bit higher up too. But yeah, just absolutely crazy, the stuff that we grew up thinking, and it was all based on misconceptions and kind of a lack of knowledge about how the human body actually processes each of these, these proteins and fats and carbohydrates. Just very interesting stuff. I'm looking at my notes because I had a lot here, but yeah. That was pretty much the main things, the other big thing I did think was interesting to note, there are some carnivores who have incorporated some fruits in, limited amounts back into their diets. And to me, that makes a lot more sense than incorporating vegetables. Why? Because fruits literally are evolved to try and attract mammals and, different creatures to eat them. Like, they have evolved to be sweet and delicious and visually appealing, okay? All things that are trying to get creatures to consume them, and then they poop the seeds out and spread the plants elsewhere, okay? Versus vegetables that literally have compounds in them that it's like makes our bodies, doesn't mesh well with our bodies sometimes. And yes, they do have good stuff in them. I'm not saying vegetables are all bad. I'm just saying when you look at what each type of food, meats, fruits, vegetables, how each of them have evolved and their purpose for human beings, it just makes sense that the vegetables, if you include any, going to be a little tiny portion, not the majority of your diet. So, I don't know. I thought this was really interesting stuff. It makes me excited to keep going on this journey, and, I don't know what I'm going to do exactly after a month, I'll be honest with you guys, but it's a continual learning process. I'm excited about it, and we're going to keep going. We're going to finish this month out. We're going to finish strong, and yeah, hope this was informational for you if you'd never heard some of this stuff. I will link some of the articles that I read, and I'll link the video for Fat Fiction in the description below if you're curious about watching any of that stuff. Great information. I highly recommend watching it. It was so eye-opening for me. Anyways, I am out. That's day 15 results. Bye, friends.